when you want me to start sharing.
Hello everyone and welcome to Bringing Back the Manchester Argus Butterfly Back Home, the tale of the Great Manchester Wetland Partnership. I'm Megan, I'll be hosting the event, and the wonderful Jo will be presenting on the partnership. This is all part of our 3 species, 1 wild comeback appeal. So thank you very much for coming along, and I will hand over to Jo.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining tonight. I think I'm going to be speaking for about 45 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes. I think you're being asked to put any questions into the Q&A section, and then we'll go through all those at the end. So without further ado, I will start to share my screen. Go. Okay, does that all look good? I hope so.
Yes.
So, thank you. I'm always a little bit hesitant about the technology. I don't have an awful lot of luck, but we'll keep our fingers crossed for tonight. So yes, so this presentation is going to talk about the reintroduction journey of the Manchester Argus butterfly and how we worked in partnership to bring it back home to the Manchester mosslands. So just to start off, just a little bit about myself. My name's Jo Kennedy. I'm the head of landscape nature recovery at the Trust. I've worked for the Trust for around 8 years. So I get involved with all kinds of things, but I'm also the coordinator for the Great Manchester Wetlands Partnership, which I'll cover in the talk. Also, just a little bit about Lancashire Wildlife Trust for those of you who might not be so familiar with our work. We're a charity that was founded in 1962. We cover Lancashire, North Merseyside, and 7 out of the 10 Greater Manchester boroughs. We've got approximately 180 staff, 31,000 members, a large number of volunteers, and we manage around 1,300 hectares of land. And in common with all the wildlife trusts in the UK, our aims are to achieve 30% of land and sea in recovery for nature, and for 1 in 4 people to be taking action for nature, as well as playing our part in addressing the climate and biodiversity emergencies. This is a map of the area that we cover across those counties. And you can see that the sites that we manage are very well distributed across that area. So on to tonight's talk. So this evening, I'm going to cover off a bit about the Manchester Argus butterfly and why it needed help, what happened to the places where it used to live, what has been done to recover nature in it so that we could start this project, talk about the species reintroduction project, how it was set up and the steps that we took, and then a little bit of a forward look. So just to recap, what is it that we've actually achieved through this work so far? So far we've carried out a multi-year reintroduction of the Manchester Argus butterfly, which is also known as the Large Heath, to its former home on the Manchester Mosses Special Area of Conservation, where it's been missing for the last 150 years. So this is very much linked to our peatland restoration work, and we tend to describe species reintroductions as the icing on the cake. But you might wonder why, and you might think, well, what was necessary to even get to the point that we could consider doing species reintroductions? Hopefully tonight all will become clear. So just a little bit of geography. Here we are in the northwest of England, obviously. Then in the middle at the top, we have a sort of red amoebic blob, and that is the area of the Great Manchester Wetlands Nature Improvement Area, which you can see is snugly fitted in between Manchester and Liverpool. And within that, we have an area called Chat Moss, which is about 8 miles west of Manchester city centre, and it goes across Wigan and Salford as well as Warrington. And across that area, there are a number of peatland sites. Some are nature reserves, some are triple SIs, and 3 of them make up the European designated site called the Manchester Mosses Special Area of Conservation. That's the highest level of designation that you can get for nature sites. And that's made up of Astley and Bedford mosses, Holcroft moss and Risley moss. So moving on to the butterfly itself, it was first identified on the Manchester mosses in 1795 by a chap called Mr. Lewin, and it is a subspecies of the large heath, and this particular subspecies was named the Manchester Argos after where it was discovered. So it was all well documented all those years ago. Here's the first challenge. How do I pronounce that Latin name? Okay, I'm going to give it a go. Synonympha tulia, subspecies davus. So it is it's the subspecies of this type of butterfly is the darkest and the most colourful of the subspecies. So I asked the question at the beginning, why did this butterfly particularly need help? So the key factor for its decline and its disappearance from the Manchester mosses was the loss of its habitat. But overall, as well as that, across England and Wales, it is actually a declining species. The populations where it remains are becoming increasingly isolated. It's a UK BAP species, and Butterfly Conservation estimate a decline of 60% overall since the 1970s. And you can see here we have an occurrence change over those 2 periods, both unfortunately in the wrong direction, and also while there was an increase in abundance since 2005, that's actually decreased by nearly 50%. So it's at risk, and in Lancashire we know it's been lost from 5 out of its 7 former known homes, and we estimate that it became locally extinct in Manchester from around the late 1800s. So this was mainly because of the loss and the fragmentation of the lowland raised bog habitats that it relies on. So basically, also, it's a very tiny little butterfly, and it doesn't move around much. And the next nearest site where it is thriving is up in North Lancashire. So it was very, very unlikely that the butterfly was going to be able to recolonise without our help. So I mentioned habitat loss and peatlands being the underlying cause of the decline of the large heath butterfly. And I mentioned something called lowland raised bog. Many of you will no doubt be aware of raised bogs in the uplands, quite a characteristic habitat of our area, but you might not be so aware of lowland raised bogs, which are precisely what they say. They are bogs that occur in the lowlands, and we used to have a significant amount in Lancashire, and in the UK, in fact, is one of the top 10 countries in the world for peat, which is the constituent of a bog. Hopefully some of you will know that peat is a very slow forming material. It lays down at the rate of about 1 millimetre a year. So it takes a very long time to form. So it's essentially it's non-renewable. There've been losses globally of peatlands. Globally, it's around 12%, but in the UK, it's massively higher than that, and it's estimated we've lost around 80% of our peatlands. A lot of this is due to drainage of the peatlands to convert to agriculture, forestry, and turf production, as well as extraction of peat by industrial methods for horticulture. Which is why we always try and encourage people to use the peat-free compost, because then you know you haven't wrecked a lowland raised bog. So we have lost a lot of peat areas, a lot of lowland raised bog areas, and in particular, the area of focus for this project, Chat Moss, is estimated to have lost about 98%. And the sites that do remain were fragmented and damaged, and this did result in the loss of a lot of specialist species, both plants and invertebrates. So I've talked about Chat Moss. This was formerly the 5th largest lowland raised bog in England. In fact, it was part of a whole series of connected mosslands across the wider Mersey Valley. And we've got records that show that only 300 years ago, it was still considered as a desolate wilderness. Daniel Defoe, in his journeys around Britain, wrote about it with a bit of hint of despair as to what use it had to man. That was before they understood the role that peat plays in carbon sequestration. But as I say, a lot of it's been lost now, starting from around the early 1800s. The Manchester to Liverpool railway line is nearly 200 years since that was opened, and that was one of the factors that started opening the moss up to more development. And since then, there's been a number of activities that have contributed to draining the peat and it being lost. Okay, moving on. But this is in common with, the wider area. And of course, our region was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. So much of our landscape would have looked very, very different only a few decades ago. And what's happening now is this landscape is starting to recover from that deleterious effect on the ecology. So over the last few decades, we've been seeing many shoots of green recovery. Here's a before and after photo of Wigan from the air. So Wigan, in a lot of people's minds, would be associated with industry, coal mining, textile industries. But in more recent decades, the area has greened immensely. And it's now the greenest urban borough in England. So with these green shoots and green roots, then a number of organisations started looking at the area and saying, well, what else could be done? How can we revive this area, restore it? Quite a lot of reports and studies identified potential for improvement across this area. And it started becoming known as a wetlands area. And then back in 2010, so 15 years ago now, the very influential Lawton report was published called Making Space for Nature. And this set out some of the nature recovery principles that are really at the heart of what a lot of nature conservation organisations like ourselves, how we base our work in making nature recovery networks. And so it's around, oh, hang on a minute, that's not showing you there we are, sorry about that. You couldn't see the diagram. But yes, so it's the principles of how you enable nature to thrive by not only having sites that are dedicated for nature or made better for nature, but also connecting those sites up and allowing species to move around so that they're more resilient to pressures like climate change. So it's all about better quality habitats and enabling species movement and expansion. On the back of that, back in about 2011, there was the creation of a new concept called nature improvement areas. And at the time, a number of partners, including Lancashire Wildlife Trust, got together and put together a proposal to set up something called the Great Manchester Wetlands. And that's where that was where we came up with the area that it would cover and what it was aiming for and what its characteristics were. So we put in a bid for some funding to set this project up, and we were looking at different character areas within that. But essentially, we described the area as a wetlands area with networks of rivers, canals, lakes and ponds, but also mosslands. So unfortunately, we weren't successful with the funding bid, but we decided to go ahead with the partnership, and it's now been in existence for the last 14 years. Lancashire Wildlife Trust lead the partnership and chair it, and we've got a strong membership of around 20 organisations from local authorities, private companies, charities, academic institutions and public bodies. So we work together for this vision around creating a thriving, resilient and inspirational living landscape that delivers benefits to communities and the economy. And so far, the partnership's been incredibly successful. We estimate there's been around £20 million worth of delivery, possibly more. I may not have counted it right. But very, very significantly, from the work of that partnership, 2 national nature reserves have come into existence. The Flashes of Wigan and Lee was declared in 2022, and that covered 800 hectares. And this year, the Risley, Holcroft and Chatmoss NNR was declared, covering 530 hectares. So these are pretty immense achievements, and they reflect the work of partners, including ourselves, to increase connectivity and restoration of the peatlands, and our work on wider habitat and species conservation. So we're also, the partnership, as well as that, we're also investigating and demonstrating new solutions to the sort of environmental problems that we face. So here's an aerial picture of natural flood management works on Bickershaw, which is an ex-colliery site in Wigan. And we're also working on things like wetter farming trials on peat to achieve carbon emissions reductions and protect peatlands. We do a lot of work engaging and supporting land managers, local communities and wider organisations to get involved with their green spaces and to help restore the landscape. We ran a 5-year heritage funded project called Carbon Landscape, which was across nearly 800 hectares of land across Wigan, Warrington and Salford. And this was incredibly successful, and we engaged nearly 11,000 people over the course of that time. Considering COVID was slap bang in the middle, that's no mean achievement. The Carbon Landscape project was really fundamental to the actual species reintroduction project. So you might be thinking, hang on, what's she going on about? We have thought we were here to talk about species reintroductions. Well, I'm coming back to that. So this is really just to sort of set the scene and how we were able to get to the point where we could consider species reintroductions. So the carbon landscape helped immensely with getting us ready for the partnership working that was going to be needed to do that kind of work. And alongside this, we were starting to see rapid improvements in the peat sites in the area. So, for example, in under 10 years, we've made considerable progress. Was made by Lancashire Wildlife Trust in restoring the formerly industrially extracted Little Walden Moss site. So the top left-hand photo is what it looked like at the end of quite a number of years of industrial peat extraction. So pretty much nothing there. Not a lot of peat left, and really a blank canvas for restoration. But since then, through concerted efforts, we've managed to revegetate that site, re-wet it, and we continue to see an increase in the diversity of species present at the site. We also made progress at other sites, such as Astley Moss and Risley Moss, through working with Natural England and Warrington Borough Council's work at Risley Moss. So we started to think, are these sites now good enough? Could we now start looking at the next step in the restoration journey? And this is Little Walden Moss about 2 years ago. So as you can see, it's really looking quite nice. So how was the project set up? We had a feeling among the partners that now was the right time to start working on this. So we set ourselves up as a distinct project in around about 2018, and we brought in experts to plug the gaps that, so that we had a really robust steering group. We brought in Butterfly Conservation, Liverpool John Moores University, Chester Zoo, and the Northwest Rare Plants Initiative. And we thought, well, we need to make sure we're doing this totally properly. At the time, the main source of guidance was the IUCN species reintroduction guidelines. So we adopted those, and we developed a project-specific tool so that we could cross-check our work with the guidance to make sure that our projects had clear goals, that we'd established a historic range for the species we were looking at, that our approach was meeting the needs of the species, addressing risks, included monitoring, and covered permissions. In England now, there is a set of England-specific species reintroduction guidelines, which are aligned with the IUCN ones. So you have to excuse me because I've used Large Heath and Manchester Argos a bit interchangeably in my slides. So I hope this isn't confusing anybody, but they are essentially referring to the same species. So the first steps were to secure some funding to support work at the receptor site. So just for those of you who might not be familiar with this sort of terminology, we have two types of sites that we use in reintroduction projects. We have a donor site, which is where we source the species from to use in the reintroduction, and we have the receptor site. So that's the site where we're reintroducing it to. So you'll see these terms used in the presentation. So yes, we worked quite closely with Chester Zoo. We knew they actually have quite an extensive native species program. So while they're pretty well known for their work on rare species globally, they also work on British, UK species as well. So they were really keen to work with us on this. So this slide looks a little more technical, but don't be alarmed. These are the steps we needed to go through for the project. We needed to look at whether the site that we wanted to bring the butterfly back to were suitable, and that involved carrying out something called a feasibility study. We needed to find out where we would source butterflies from, and we needed to start surveying those sites to make sure that the populations there were healthy and could carry the removal of some individuals. And as I say, we needed to secure some funding. So on the feasibility, we brought in another expert, a guy called Tim Melling of the RSPB, who was an expert on this butterfly. And he came round with us and had a look at the potential receptor sites. And then we worked with a couple of universities in the region to help confirm this initial assessment with a more rigorous study. And we identified that Winmarleigh Moss, which handily is actually owned by and managed by Lancashire Wildlife Trust as well. And that's the site up in North Lancashire, just north of Garstang. So we carried out surveying there on the population at that site. So we were very fortunate to receive funding from Veolia Environmental Trust in order to improve the sites that had been identified as having potential. So we did a lot of planting of bog plants. So the butterfly's food plant is primarily cross-leaved heath, although obviously it does feed on whatever else is around as well, but that's the primary food plant. And then the caterpillars rely on a plant called hare's tail cotton grass, which is quite a, you may have seen this if you've been out and about. It's got these very distinctive cotton-like sort of flower heads. So we planted up a lot more of those. And we also carried out other habitat improvements like re-wetting and removing scrub species. So we then started working on a project plan with Chester Zoo. We needed to assess our approach against that IUCN protocol that I mentioned earlier. And we needed to make sure we had all the permissions in place. So with the project plan, with Chester Zoo, we considered using captive rearing as the approach, and the benefits that would provide would be they could rear the butterflies from the egg stage to the pupal stage to ensure safety from predators, and this would achieve a suitable population size. So in 2019, the actual on the ground work kicked off. We'd got all the Natural England licenses in place, and we were keeping a close eye on Winmarleigh moss to see when the butterflies would start emerging. They only have a fairly short flight season, just a few weeks, and when they exactly come out often depends on factors including temperature. Yeah, sorry. Yes, that's right. Often it's the end of June, beginning of July, but we have to keep an eye, you know, as early as the beginning of June, just to make sure we don't miss the emergence of the butterflies. So this is a picture of one of the keepers at Chester Zoo, and he's caught one of the butterflies and he's having a look at it to check whether it's male or female, and if it is female, is it gravid? And what gravid means is it's basically it's mated and it's got eggs. So they were the ones we wanted to capture, and once we had managed to capture and identify a very small number of those, they were taken to Chester Zoo and placed in bespoke containers, enclosures, where they could lay their eggs. So it was great working with the zoo because they were able to train our own staff to how to undertake this identification so that we were self-sufficient and didn't need to rely on keeper time. So then once the gravid females were at the zoo, they laid their eggs on the various substrates in the enclosure. So they had their food plants in the enclosure, the hare's tail cotton grass, and any eggs that didn't get laid on the hare's tail cotton grass, the zoo staff very kindly moved to the hare's tail cotton grass. And the zoo staff, the keepers, monitored the eggs. They monitored the enclosures, and the large heath basically went through its life cycle within that enclosure with these teeny tiny caterpillars, which then overwintered in the tussocks of the hare's tail cotton grass and ate and grew and grew, and around about the end of May, beginning of June, they were pupating and they were prepared for transportation to the receptor site. So that top left picture is a picture of the pupae. They're essentially attached to these sticks for transport, which the zoo said was that's just what you do to transport pupae. So when they were ready and all the pupae had been gathered, our Lancashire Wildlife Trust staff collected them from the zoo and took them to the release site, where we had this very high-tech little tent to put them in. We then monitored them on a twice daily basis, and as soon as newly emerged butterflies were identified, they were released onto the wider site. So the first release was in 2020, and then further releases were made in subsequent years to boost the population. And overall, we were able to release 84 butterflies between 2020 and 2023. That might not sound like a great deal, but we were dealing with fairly small numbers to start with, and we did have one year that was a bit of a blip. I'll cover that later on. So yes, here's some further pictures, close up of the pupae, and one of the newly emerged large heath butterflies. You can see is a beautiful little creature, and interestingly, you can see how similar they are to the original illustrations by the discoverer, Mr. Lewin. Quite interesting to see how they compare with his drawings, including the little double eye spot. So monitoring's key, and that will continue. Now we've come to the end of phase one. That will continue for a number of years at both sites. Yeah, so there was some sort of some observations made. We learned quite a lot during the project. And a number of academic papers have been produced as a result of the project as well. So, we've been sharing the knowledge from the project with people working in the field. So yes, I think that's nearly all I've got to tell you about the project. A bit of a whistle stop rattle through But essentially, the first phase of the project has established a population back to its former home where it had disappeared. And we've got some other benefits from the project as well. We've been able to do a lot of publicity around not only the butterfly itself, but our wider work with species reintroductions and also our work around peatland restoration. So we've been able to engage the public, with the wildlife. So yeah, our next steps, as I mentioned already, we're going to continue to monitor the sites, and we are in the process of planning for phase 2. So what we need to do, we can't stop there. We need to continually look after the habitat, and we'd like to improve it further and extend it so that we can make this population even more resilient to the pressures that it faces, and help it link up to other national nature reserve sites nearby. What we'd love to see is for the large heath butterfly, the Manchester Argus, to be seen fluttering all across the National Nature Reserve on the Manchester mosslands. But obviously we need help to do this. Monitoring and planning and habitat management is fairly intensive work, but it does support the National Nature Reserve, and it supports the Greater Manchester Local Nature Recovery Strategy, which has only just recently been launched. And we were delighted to see within that our mossland, peatland sites in Manchester are recognised in that strategy, and then there are aims to do more to support them, and also the insects that we're working on and to help boost are also a priority in that local nature recovery strategy. So just to let you know, I mentioned the species reintroduction group earlier. We're not just working on the large heath butterfly, we're also got a live project for the white-faced darter dragonfly, and also for the bog bush cricket, which you can see pictured here. Over the last few years, we've worked with other organisations to bring back a huge number of rare plants onto our lowland raised bogs. Not just the sphagnum mosses, which are the keystone species of peatlands, but other things like whitebeak sedge, bog myrtle, all kinds of things, and also the extremely interesting carnivorous sundews. And we have ambitions to bring back more, and really restore the entire ecosystem, which basically will allow the area to recover in full. So I think I've covered everything now, and I just wanted to say thank you for your interest in this topic. I hope you've learnt something. I hope it's been useful to you, and I'm very happy to answer any questions now. I think I probably need to stop sharing.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you very much, Jo. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and then I've got a few questions myself after learning that.
I hope I can answer them.
So the first one's from Jenny. What can people do to help reduce the loss of the large heath's habitat or peatlands in general?
Oh, that's a great one. Well, the very easy step to take is to not buy peat-based products, and to encourage your friends and families to not buy peat-based products. So I think most people are aware that you can buy peat-free compost, but also if you're buying plants from a garden centre, they're often potted in peat. So you can find out whether they are or not. And there are suppliers where you can buy plants not grown in peat. And I appreciate that is a little bit more difficult, but with consumer pressure, that will come. That's an easy win. Believe it or not, there are still sites in the UK where peat is being extracted for use in horticultural products. I think most people think it's stopped, but unfortunately it hasn't. Although a lot of peat that now does come from places like Estonia and Latvia, but also Ireland as well. So that is a very simple step you can take. If you want to do something more hands-on, you can sign up to be one of our volunteers. We run volunteer parties that go out and work on our mossland sites on a weekly basis and carry out practical conservation tasks like scrub removal or planting new species. So you can get really hands-on. So there's a whole variety of things that can be done.
Brill. And then the next question is from Lee, and they've said they really enjoyed the presentation. Thanks, Joe. Has the population remained stable at the sites since reintroduction?
Yeah, so that my figures go up to the end of 2023. We are continuing to monitor. We think the site has this year's drought has not been terribly good. And they are, the butterfly is still present, but it is under threat at the moment. And this is one of the reasons we're carrying out this appeal, because we really want to try and reinforce that population and make it more resilient. It's quite a small population. And it has, last year, you'll probably be aware if you're interested in butterflies, that last year, 2024, was a terrible year for butterflies. This year's been a better year for butterflies. That's what the figures are showing. And it's this kind of year-on-year variation. This is the butterfly that's really at the edge. We've brought it back, but we really need to do so much more to try and boost it and to make it so that the population can be more resilient to the kind of environmental and climate related variations that we're getting now. So yes, we still have a population. I don't have the precise figures, but I am aware that we think the population has dropped in terms of in number of individuals, and that is due to the climatic conditions this year and last year. So it's really urgent that we get more support to boost the site and to be able to bring back more individuals.
Brilliant. So I've got a couple of questions now. So my big one is, are there any other areas that have already reintroduced the Manchester Argus?
Yes, actually, in Lancashire, at Heysham Moss, there was a project in the 2010s that was also involved Lancashire Wildlife Trust and Chester Zoo, that very successfully brought back the large heath there. This subspecies of the large heath. So that's where we based quite a lot of the procedures and protocols. Although obviously we adapted it for our particular needs. There are currently some other large heath reintroduction projects going on. I believe there's one in Yorkshire that Yorkshire Wildlife Trust are working on at the moment. I'm not 100% sure where those are up to. And butterfly conservation are also focusing at the moment on peatland species, peatland butterfly species as well. So this is brilliant news for the species as a whole, to, to make more comebacks across England.
Brilliant. And then my final question, if anyone would like to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. Is in an ideal world, how long would it take us to restore the peatlands?
Oh my gosh. Well, in an ideal world, tomorrow.
Of course, of course.
But in reality, the site that I showed in some of the photos, Little Walden Moss, so we acquired that in 2012, and it probably took 10 years to go from nothing to something that was really starting to buzz with life. But it's vulnerable. It remains a vulnerable site because it's isolated, and that's one of the main problems with the peatland sites, is you can get it up to a certain level of condition with quite a lot of input, but it remains vulnerable because all the peatlands around it are still being drained, um, and that has an impact on that site, and that's why we've got to try and work with landowners around the sites. We've got to look at alternative ways of managing peatlands or farming on peat. And that's why we've been doing a lot of trials with something called wetter farming. So we're investigating whether it's possible to grow crops on peat, as quite a lot of that area is grade 1 farmland, and has been highly productive, and we appreciate people live there, they make their livings there, and we don't want to take that away from people. So we're working with farmers to sort of demonstrate how you can manage peatlands in a different way, produce a crop, a saleable crop that's economically viable, but also has keeps the peat wet, which then benefits the neighbouring core nature sites. So that works ongoing at the moment, and we're doing some really quite exciting stuff. So, for example, we're growing bulrush, typha, and the idea is that the seed head, the fluffy seed head from the bulrush, can be used as a more sustainable and ethical alternative to down in outdoor clothing, in down jackets and such like. So we're working with the clothing company on that trial. So there's some interesting things going on. We can't, and it's all about recognizing that we have to do this work at a sort of a landscape scale, and working on individual sites isn't going to solve or help nature recover on its own. We've got to do things at a sort of network landscape sort of scale.
Brilliant. And then kind of on the back of that, what does the healthy what are signs of a healthy lowlands?
Oh, okay. So signs of a healthy lowland raised bog. Well, it'll be wet.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. If you
Good.
walk off the path, which I don't encourage you to do, incidentally, please stay on the path.
Yes.
You will feel it squelching, and you will feel it wobbling under your feet, and you will see lots of different types of plants. You will see mosses, and you will see cotton grass, and you will see lots of insects, and they were the basis of the ecosystem. So then you will also see reptiles and birds and predators, raptors and things, and you will start to see rare species returning to these mosslands. It's absolutely fantastic. The transformation is amazing, and the peatlands. I've talked about the wildlife of the peatlands, but peat plays a massive part in preventing climate change. So peatlands are a massive carbon store. So I'm a little bit rusty on my figures, but I believe that they store as much peat as the world's more twice as much carbon. The peatlands around the world store twice as much carbon as the forests, which
Oh, wow.
absolutely blew my mind when I first learnt that. But they're an immense carbon store, which is why we need to keep them wet, because the minute you start draining them, the carbon converts to is oxidized and becomes carbon dioxide, which is obviously a greenhouse gas.
Of course.
So yeah, we're trying to protect the ones we've got that are healthy and try and reverse the degradation of the ones that have been impacted.
Brilliant. That's it for my questions. I don't think there's any more.
Okay, well, those are great questions. And if anyone wants to get in touch, you can probably get in touch through our website. Megan, is that the best way? If anyone wants to get hold of me or ask me anything specifically about the project.
Of course. I've got someone in the Q&A asking if they would like to reach out, because they are one of two officers on the Making Peatlands work for the, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher the name, Lepidoptera project across Northern England.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that'd be great. Please do get in touch.
I am happy to share their contact information if you would like to reach out, Joe.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes,
of course.
Definitely. I'd love that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming. If you would like to continue to support the amazing work that Jo and her team are doing, then please donate to the appeal. There will be a recording sent out tomorrow on our YouTube page. So for people who couldn't attend due to schedule clashes, then it's readily available for them. But a huge thank you to Jo for hosting this for us for the appeal.
No problem. And thanks for organising it. And thank you everyone for your interest. Please follow us, and yeah, hopefully we'll have some more exciting developments. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.
Is that